Matt Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in this debate today with the perspective as being a former serving police officer, where I saw firsthand how our justice system far too often failed both communities and victims, most importantly. Repeat offenders simply cycling in and out of custody, victims living in fear, and prisons simply being at breaking point. That's why we need urgent reform, and why I welcome this government's delivering the most significant changes to sentencing in over a generation. Last summer, prison overcrowding reached an all-time high, as we've heard before. Our system has stretched the crisis, and we cannot let that happen again. The independent sentencing review exposed what many of us working in the system knew all too well. There were too few prison spaces, too little support for victims, and short sentences that were doing nothing to cut reoffending. The Conservatives extended sentences for serious crimes by almost 2 years on average, yet built just 500 new places in 14 years. The result was prisons so overstretched that 10,000 offenders had to be released early. That's unacceptable, unsustainable, and it must not happen again. I welcome the government's commitment to building 14,000 prison places over the next decade, with 2,500 already being added. But I will give way.
The 10,000 additional prison places estate expansion, house blocks and refurbishments, and the 10,000 additional prison places estate expansion, category D, are both rated at red currently because the supplier has gone into administration. Does he share my concerns that I heard nothing from the Minister this morning about what the government's doing to make sure that that stays on track?
I would share those concerns, but I have complete faith and confidence in my front bench government colleagues. So, there we go. More so than of the previous government. But building new places alone is not enough. If we are serious about cutting crime, we must change the way that sentencing works and future-proof the justice system. In the police force, I saw victims living in fear as violent offenders were released early, while petty offenders just wasted away in jail cells. They were serving short sentences that did nothing to change their behaviour and nothing to make our communities safer. I also saw the opposite. I saw how the community sentences, the tough and visible ones that we're talking about, gave offenders a chance to change course. I remember offenders being sent to clean graffiti, clearing rubbish, and for the first time making a positive contribution to the very communities that they had once damaged. And for some vulnerable offenders, a short prison stay is not a deterrent but a danger. It exposes them to hardened criminals, pulls them into more violent lifestyles, and leads them further down a path of reoffending even. That is why this bill's presumption to suspend short sentences in favour of unpaid work and community service style punishment is important. Done properly, these sentences can foster community cohesion, and that will make offenders visibly repay the public for the damage that they have done. They can reassure victims that wrongdoers are held to account, and they can deter crime by breaking the cycle of reoffending that short sentences too often fuel. Another part close to my heart is that victims and survivors deserve a system that keeps them safe and listens to their fears. Too often they do not have that. This is why I welcome the provisions for victims in the bill, such as domestic abuse will now be explicitly called out in court, creating a clear and consistent record that will help protect victims and manage offenders. Specialist domestic abuse courts will mean stronger support for victims and proper rehabilitation for abusers. Victims of rape and sexual offences will have access to judges' sentencing remarks and better information. And above all of this, the purposes of sentencing will now place the protection of victims at the heart of our justice system. I will continue to advocate for transparency so victims can understand how sentencing works. And after experiencing crime, they should not have to wait to face a justice system that leaves them in the dark. We do need to do more for victims, such as allowing them to have unfiltered victim impact statements and say what they want to during sentencing, but this is a step for another bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, I saw in my policing days how victims were left unheard and unprotected, how sentencing failed to deliver justice or reduce crime. This bill begins to put that right. We're building the prison places, we're reforming sentencing, and we're putting victims, finally, at the centre of justice. That is what the public expects, that is what the public deserves, and that is what this Labour government will deliver. The bill is about turning sentencing from a revolving door into a system that protects victims and cuts crime.